Hey, 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 hey,
We should be in peak condition for LexCorp. Waller does not suspect us.
hey, hey,
We
hey,
can perform other missions.
hey, hey. Hey,
Let's talk about
motherfucker. Hey,
life
motherfucker.
decisions.
Hey.
Let's talk about owner
Gotta love that.
operators, dirty trucking.
When he's back online, that is.
Let's do this example.
Integration or any
Let's
otherwise.
say I'm 50 and I'm
Alive.
still
Ready to
struggling
catch more
financially
geniuses this
like
time.
I'm 21. Why is it so many middle-aged people still struggling
Bro,
financially
I'm
like
trying
I'm
to fill up
21?
my fish tank. What the fuck?
Why is it so
Come on, give me a second here.
A fine target, Harley. I will end it.
Alright, fill that shit up.
Well, if they're a younger person? I know the answer. It's not an answer to fit everybody. This is my theory on money, on the game. It's a game. It's a game of life that we play, that everybody plays. Okay, everybody plays the life of money. So there's only like three main things. Either you don't make enough money, which is probably 60% of Americans. They don't make enough money. They live beyond their means, which is a group of people fall in these two categories. You don't make enough, or you live beyond your means. Then you can go down the middle. Your income is too consistent. Let me use me for an example. Ever since I made this choice in my life personally, I never struggled. I never struggled to pay my rent. Ever since I did this one thing, I never struggled to pay my rent. Now you know, ever, ever since, because I was with a company for over 10 years. It did not make nowhere near my trucking paychecks. Nowhere near. Not even the same planet. Income wise. Way low. Because I was with a company for over 10 years. But see, in society, we think because people work at a job for a long period of time, they make a lot of money. That's the one myth that I realized as I got older. Shit. Because as I'm 40 now, I realize people work at jobs for years, they don't make a lot of money. Because the industry that they work in pays so low. So the cost of living goes up, but your pay is still down here. You know, they not aware. They just not aware, man. I started renting rooms over 15 years ago. So I've been renting rooms for 15 years. So regardless if my salary is up or low, I still can afford to pay my rent. I never ever since ever, ever since ever since ever since I did that. Now you can look at it however you want to look at it, but that me alone outsmarted so many people. Because so many people right now are struggling financially. So many people are they don't have enough money for this, for that, for this, for that. Let me use Dirty Trucking for an example. I'm watching Dirty Trucking, and I just feel bad. Like, where did we go wrong in life? You're 50 years old, you're still struggling. But you know what? Dirty Trucking is millions of middle-aged Americans. You want to know why they don't make enough money? They make money, but you don't make enough. What's inconsistent? I looked up the average salary for an Uber driver. I was an Uber driver. The average salary for an Uber driver is $40,000 a year. So obviously, and I'm gonna say that's dead on. That's dead on. Because I Uber drive for 4 years. That's dead on. Now you got some Uber drivers gonna say I'm making more, I'm making less, or whatever. But Google say the average salary for an Uber driver is $40,000. I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. Poor, poor. See, there's nothing wrong with being poor, like there's nothing wrong with being fat. Just know that you're motherfucking fat. Nothing wrong with being obese. Just know that you're obese. Know your lane. Don't want a 10, but what's wrong? What's wrong with America? A lot of fat people want fit people. Same with a lot of poor people. A lot of poor people want big houses, new cars. They struggle. Dirty trucking. I'm hearing her talk, and man, she talking about her rent. She poor. You watching their videos, hear her talk. It's like your friends. You hear them talk. You can tell the poor people versus the people that's doing okay. Because they talk about finance and they struggle. And they struggle. What you do for? Let me see. What do you do for a living? Is that a high income job or a low income job? Oh, okay. It's a low income job. Where do you live at? Oh, okay. Your rent $1,500 and you struggling. Oh, okay, okay, okay. Now, don't get me wrong. A percentage of people struggle in silence. They don't say anything. They just struggle in silence. Not majority of people. Not majority of people. Majority of people do not struggle in silence. They don't struggle in silence, man. They don't. You wish more for people as you get older. You don't understand that the money. This is the money game. Either you make a lot of money or you don't make a lot. And now it's subjective. Money is subjective based on kids. Where do you live at? It's based on a few different factors. I'm so happy at the age of 40, I didn't get married. I didn't have kids. I ain't have none of that shit, and I'm happy. Because you niggas that married and kids, y'all need to make so much money. You really need to make 100 and 200K. In this married world now, depending on where you live at, you need to make 100 or 200K. If you're making 50,000, you're struggling. It's just a struggle. 3 kids, 3,000, wife, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. A single person, no kids, living in somebody's basement like a dorm or whatever you living someplace cheap like renting a room. Here's the deal. Nobody says you gotta get married. It's not legally that I gotta get married. I don't legally gotta get married. I don't legally have to have kids. And I don't legally have to buy a house. But society and people act like they gotta do all of that. You don't have to do none of that shit. I'm watching Dirty Trucking, and this is another thing, a life lesson I realized. The older people get, you can't tell people shit. It's a group of friends, men and women. The older they get, you can't tell them anything because they know everything. You can't. Dirty Trucking is the exact same way. You can't tell it's Dirty Trucking is millions of women and men similar. They're poor. They live in paranoia. They don't hardly make any money, and they're paranoid.
Restrictive at all. I think it's still loose. Monetary policy has.
Yeah.
So what the?
I don't like asking my parents for money. That's why I'm here.
Did I suggest asking them for? I'm confused. What? I didn't ask. What are you talking about? No, I'm saying $200 would be important. If you have to ask your parents for money, you should probably know if you're making $1,300 a paycheck or $1,200.
I'm gonna say 12.
You're gonna say, but unfortunately, you're not a reliable narrator. So, like, whether or not I can actually count that towards anything, and then $550 from the ex.
Oh, yes.
Did you guys ever date? Did you guys
Yeah,
ever try?
we did. Yes,
Okay.
I did. It was past overdue. It was like a year and a half, almost 2.
What was? The relationship? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
I really tried, but he was just cheating left and right.
Oh,
Yeah.
And was he popping out other babies?
I don't know.
Dude doesn't know how to pull out.
But you know what? Actually, I have a story about, like, once he was, like, acting sketchy, and he was like, oh, my friend just thinks that she's pregnant. I'm like, well, I was just pregnant, so I can give her advice, right? Turns out it might be his baby.
Was it?
Oh, she ended up not being pregnant. And she was also in a lesbian relationship, so.
What the f*** are you talking about, dude?
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
No, what do you...
About my relationship with my baby daddy. He's not the best.
Yeah, she wouldn't get pregnant if she's only sleeping with women.
Europe's economy unexpectedly stagnated in the final 3 months of last year, perfectly demonstrating why European banks refused to lend, instead piling up massive amounts of government bonds, safety, and liquidity. The stagnation is also the reason why the European Central Bank cut its rates yet again today and is likely to cut quite a bit more for the rest of this year. To start with, calling the stagnation is just way too generous. While GDP growth in the fourth quarter is zero, the reality is that 2+ years of forgetting how to grow, that kind of economic output is actually poor.
All deployed units. We have the flash. Wonder Woman is your remaining priority target.
For what a ship recovery would actually look like. Germany contracted again. Italy is going nowhere. That country posting its own
I have never gone against Waller's will before.
No wonder European banks think incredibly defensive, becoming even more so as time goes by. Of course, as I've been selling the video just recently, they can call it stagnation, but it is so much worse than that. Some things have normalization after being red hot, but there is nothing normal nor positive about anything. Companies are not hiring. In some of these worse off economies, employers are already firing. The labor market is an absolute mess, while central bankers say it's all right, it's not too bad, it's just a little stagnation. What's the big deal? The big deal is this isn't just a European thing. Europe's merely the best example, the clearest example of this huge hole. Because economies all over the world, all over the place, they all forgot how to grow too. Moreover, this is what markets have been warning about ever since the stagnation hole started way back in late 2022. So rates are falling on fundamentals, low growth and inflation expectations, and however you want to characterize European GDP, that's exactly what it is, way too low. Now that central banks are doing what they always do, following markets lowering their own interest rates, not as stimulus, but rather as the final nail in the coffin of the idea of pandemic recovery. And all of this is what happens when artificial interventions distort the global economy and end up impoverishing almost everyone in it. Central bankers will continue to resist calling this what it actually is. They'll say it's just a little bit of stagnation or normalization, but we know it's not the case. In fact, politicians have been trying to do the same thing, downplay these negatives. How has that worked out for many of them? But for now, central bankers have to deal with that reality, and that reality means more and lower interest rates. And that reality is exactly what the ECB did today, which was another rate cut, and as Christine Lagarde said at a press conference, more yet to come. So the ECB lowered its deposit rate, which is the floor for money market rates, or quasi-floor, to 2.75% from 3%. The midpoint, or MRO, was lowered to 2.9% from 3.15%. And speaking in her prepared remarks at the press conference, Lagarde said, "The economy is facing headwinds, but rising real incomes and the gradually fading effects of restrictive monetary policy should support a pickup in demand over time." And they keep saying the same things. First of all, it was not restrictive interest rates that led to this forgetting how to grow to begin with, and rising real incomes have not shown up anywhere to have any positive effect on the real economy. Thus, the fourth quarter GDP in Europe. The stagnation shows how central bankers, economists, and many politicians keep expecting things to turn around and get better, yet quarter after quarter they don't. And Europe is the best example of this out of anywhere. Stagnation that goes back all the way to 2022. Nothing has changed despite all of the promises, despite all of the statements, despite all of the forecasts that the European Central Bank officials have been making this entire time. Instead, GDP is a perfect example, first of all, that the promises always come up short, that the economy itself continues to come up short, and that most of all, it forgot how to grow, because it didn't forget. get how to grow. It is a symptom of the bigger problem. You can't just impoverish everyone and expect everything to work out just fine. And though this doesn't look like a traditional recession, in many ways it's not a traditional recession, it's much worse. After all, the ECB has been cutting rates since last June, and market interest rates have been falling since October of 2023, and yet the quote-unquote stagnation continues anyway. And that's exactly the word they use, continuing with the ECB. The economy stagnated in the fourth quarter, according to Eurostat's preliminary flash estimate. It is set to remain weak in the near term. Surveys indicate that manufacturing continues to contract while services expanding, consumer confidence is fragile, and households have not yet drawn significant encouragement from rising real incomes to significantly increase their spending. Nevertheless, they continue, the conditions for a recovery remain in place. These are conditions that have been in place for a couple of years and it hasn't happened. While the labor market has softened over recent months, it continues to be robust. They call it robust, with the unemployment rate for all of Europe staying low at 6.3%, but no one is hiring. And speaking of interest rates, Lagarde at her press conference said, "We know the direction of travel. For those who would like to have this solid forward guidance, it would be totally unrealistic to do anything of that nature simply because we are facing significant and probably rising uncertainty at the moment." By direction of travel, she said, basically, while there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, they don't know how trade wars might play out, there's still some uncertainty in their models about consumer prices, though they have more confidence in the Fed. What she's basically saying is rates are going to go down because the economy, as far as they're concerned, requires lower interest rates, which is exactly what the markets have been saying ever since this showed up in October of 2022. Speaking of markets, short-dated German bonds headed for their best day in more than 2 months as traders ramped up wagers on additional interest rate cuts from the European Central Bank this year. The 2-year German shots fell as much as 10 basis points to 2.18%, the biggest drop since November 22nd, while longer-dated rates also fell. Money markets came to close to fully pricing 3 more quarter-point reductions this year, and it's actually a probability spectrum that goes further than that, following Thursday's rate cut, which had been widely expected and took the deposit rate, as I said, down to 2.75%. Europe is being held back by its largest economies, Germany, France, and Italy in particular. But where the mainstream and the European Central Bank, to an extent, go wrong is saying that the weakness is attributable to political turmoil in those places, particularly Germany and France, when the political turmoil is instead a symptom of the prolonged economic weakness, and especially, as I've been saying all along, governments who refuse to acknowledge that as weakness. Governments that have said all along, well, this is no recession, this is a little bit of stagnation, this is just normalization, when you can see very clearly, even though GDP does not look like a traditional recession, it is very much pointing to something bad anyway. So saying that political turmoil is somehow the reason for this weakness is getting the cart before the horse. The weakness led to the political turmoil, not the other way around. And the weaker and the longer this weakness goes on, the more prolonged this stagnation gets to be, more turmoil there will end up being in more places than just France and Germany. And what Eurostat just reported this morning, even before the ECB came out, they showed that real GDP across the euro area, the 19 countries of the euro area, increased very, very small amount, 0.03%. Now, the ECB's own models have projected a 0.2% increase, or 7 times what they got, as well as many economists and analysts were expecting a 0.1% or better. And that's down sharply from the 0.4% increase in the third quarter. So you can see why a lot of economists and even politicians and policymakers were expecting better fortunes, because the third quarter was another one of those that popped higher, and it looked like maybe this is the start of the recovery period. But same as we've seen time and time again, whenever GDP puts in a good quarter, it is followed up by a bad one. Or maybe sometimes it puts up a couple good quarters, but inevitably it never lasts. Nothing has changed over these 2 years, which is strong evidence of exactly what I'm talking about. It's not that economies forgot how to grow. They're trying their best and failing to deal with this impoverishment that was forced upon them by all of these price distortions from 2021 and 2022, especially oil prices. The weakest one of the bunch continues to be Germany. German GDP, as expected, after the German government came out and said that full-year GDP contracted for the second straight year, we knew fourth quarter GDP had to contract to make that happen. And Germany continues this weird back and forth. 11 consecutive quarters. One positive, the next one negative. Then the next one positive, the next one negative. So once again, you see this pattern where it does not look like a traditional recession, but over time it is a massive, massive recession. It is a huge hole for output to be in. So you can look at the third quarter and say, well, that's positive, therefore GDP, the economy is doing relatively well, it's just stagnation. And so it fell by 0.2% in the fourth quarter. What's the big deal? The big deal is the 2+ years of going nowhere. That's the big deal because it confirms everything I'm saying here. France even put up its first negative quarter since the first quarter of 2023, falling by 0.08%. Wasn't a huge negative, but like Germany, French GDP now stagnating and worse in the fourth quarter, and it has forgotten how to grow just like the German one had. Even though it's a little bit better off, it's not as straight side.
Hey, Cash Force X, I want to take cash from Cobblepot. You don't know where it's new target selected. Tell Gizmo to come over here, grab a ladder, and say that to my face.
VAT on school fees.
I am the predator here.
The increased national insurance
Don't let the shark close the distance to you.
because it's so
Ray, don't be late.
of the way to grow an economy. They accept the fact
I
that
am
14
as tired
years,
as the ocean.
Labour,
Target eliminated, minimum collateral.
increasing to
Good job.
2028, 25% corporation tax, 20% national insurance, you name it, pension contributions have just gone up to the employer. Since Labour came in, I now have 125,000 extra yearly tax to pay, which means I probably need to make 600 or 700 grand extra just to pay. And what big companies are doing now, which is just millions, they're basically just
Target faces by rat party.
and here's how I fix it in 8.
I rule the streets.
Now, there's two types of economy. There's the economy and your economy, and they're linked.
The last crew was a real bunch of clowns.
Labour, Kyrgyzstan,
No feds quit. New target in sight. Keep sending them back where they came from in pieces, TFX.
The economy is not going to grow. So your economy, everyone
Ah,
in
nothing can
increasing
stop
our
me.
own GDP. The thing is, at the moment, the best way to do that for people is to leave the go buy their 5% VAT, 9%. No, it's not. So, here are my 8 simple steps to fix the broken economy. Each year is guys will get this push back on these things, but all the public services.
I'm not really a sentimental type.
Wait to be shot at you.
Shut up, boomerang.
I don't think I've ever seen Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman's efforts to civilians. Green Lantern wanted to wear her down. Okay, the second thing
Bill
would be
was able to lead a handful of survivors away before making her own.
they're going to work with her.
Green Lantern moved to the colonies where she reestablished a shield around people.
If you want to come from anyone adding value, they're not adding value.
After a day like this,
Stop allowing me
we can only hope that Wonder Woman is able to heal up and get back on the fight. She might be only have the last one to stand.
for the mirror. Because half a million a year, you know, Simon. This is 171 billion spent on welfare.
Airborne and immobilized.
but not all of them. They need to go back and work. I speak to the homeless, and they all tell me I've got it. There's no point going back to work because I'll earn less at work than I do on welfare. And I can earn 150 to 200 like that. This welfare needs to be slashed. We can save 100 billion. We can put it back into the and they need labour. What about this great apprenticeship? And one thing I do is I simplify that same thing, same 25.
Who is the king of rating? We are triumphant.
Doesn't look like they got inside.
Offering
Let's hope we can find a live science
jobs
guy.
for these corporations in the future so you can get all your policies through. Stop all that, but also